Story 1. Once I was on a high school trip in the Netherlands, and after we did some activities during the day, we ended the day by playing a game of live strategy in the woods next to the farm where we slept. For the people that don't know what live strategy is, it's a live version of a board game where soldiers attack each other without knowing what rank determines who will win the other, and by memory, try to remember who's got which rank. In the live variation, you had to tag and ask people what rank they were to battle, and flee or chase the other if you knew his rank would win or lose from you. So, after about an hour of playing this game at night, in near darkness, I was chased by another guy, but managed to lose him. Then, I walked in a random direction till I reached the edge of the forest. At the edge were a couple of trees where 3 people were crouching down, staring in one direction. As I wasn't wearing glasses, and I have 3, I couldn't see that they weren't children, but men from around 25-30 years old. When I crouched next to them and asked one of them what rank he was, he angrily hissed at me to go away and leave quickly. I don't know what the hell these guys were doing there, but I ran away as fast as I could. Story 2. I grew up with a very outdoorsy family. We always went camping and hiking in the summer. I grew up outside. My mother told this story to my sister and I about a time she went camping with my dad before we were born. I was in my tent, and it was the middle of the night, perhaps 1 a.m., and I had woken up to go pee just like normal. I was about to unzip the tent when I heard a small scratching sound. I paused. It was a slow, deliberate, crunchy, digging kind of sound. It was too rhythmic for an animal, so after making sure it wasn't your father who was sharing the tent, I unzipped a corner of the door and peeked out. The moon was just bright enough for me to see a young woman squatting right next to our little 2-man tent, digging at the ground with her bare hands. Even your father was scared, so he went and shined a flashlight on her and told her to go back to wherever she had made camp. The woman got up silently, leaving a 4-inch deep hole next to the tent, and started walking away. I went outside, went pee, and got back into my sleeping bag. A few minutes later, I was awoken again by a clattering sound of a person or animal walking around where we had put our stuff. I looked outside again, and the woman was crouched low, walking around our stuff and looking at things the way a monkey might. Your father stepped out of the tent, shined the flashlight on her again, and she faced him. He asked her to kindly leave their stuff alone, but she just stood there, dirty and neglected looking, but clearly not malnourished, staring at his light. He gave up and went back into our tent. Soon, we heard her digging again at her little hole, which was literally 6 inches and 2 pieces of thin nylon away from my head. I shouted for her to go away, and she ran away in an animalistic kind of way and never returned. I fell back asleep, and in the morning our stuff was scattered, but nothing was stolen. Story 3. Had been out stargazing and was sleeping out in a park near town. No tent, just a sleeping bag and pad. This was a fairly popular area for joggers, walkers, etc. I had found a nice spot in a field a few hundred meters from the top, obscured by tall grass and brush, but with a nice view of the valley below and mountains in the distance. It was very nice. Saw some shooting stars, heard coyotes singing in the distance, and slept very well since it was a warm summer night. In the morning, at the crack of dawn, I was woken up by one of the strangest performances I've ever witnessed. Above me on the hill, I could hear some kind of chanting. Due to my concealed location, I couldn't actually see what was going on, and I wasn't keen on moving to a better vantage point, lest I be seen by the group. A man's loud and deep voice was half chanting, half shouting in a language I couldn't identify. It sounded like a Latin-derived language, and was definitely not Spanish, although he kept repeating a word that sounded similar to Diablo, which is Spanish for the devil. There were other voices too, but he was clearly leading whatever was happening up there. Eventually, he finished his chant, shout. There were some cheers and whoops, and then the entire group silently departed. After waiting a while to make sure it was clear, I went up to where the sound had come from. There was no physical evidence of whatever had happened. I asked everybody I knew in town if they had any idea what it might have possibly been, and nobody had heard anything like it. To this day, one of my greatest regrets is not peeking out of my hiding spot to see what the heck was going on. Story 4. I was geocaching once, and as I was just wandering through the woods, I came across a small patch of trees that had Mr. Potato Head faces nailed to them. I was 15 kims from civilization, and nowhere near a trail, as the cache was deep in the woods. I contacted the cache owner, and he swore they weren't there when he put the cache together, and it was his private land, so nobody should have put it there. The other instance of weirdness was when I was hitchhiking and decided to set up camp off in the woods, not far from the highway, had a fire, ate, and set up my little tent. Fell asleep without a problem. Woke up in the middle of the night to some heavy breathing outside my tent. I listened for a bit, scared shitless, and then some movement, and the sound was gone. Woke up the next morning and there was a photo of a family stuck with a nail to a tree right beside my tent and fresh footprints in the dirt. Being the idiot that I am, I followed the path of the footprints a kilometer or so back into the woods, where it ended at a road. Across the street was an abandoned house, and while checking out the house for anything useful, I found several other photos of the people from the photo, individual headshots, and notes apologizing for not protecting them or not being there for them. I got a feeling like I wasn't alone and decided to make an exit. And as I came out of the house, there was a pickup truck in the road watching me leave. He offered me a ride back to the highway and some food, drink, and told me all about the family that lived there and how they all died. I never visited the area again. It was near the border of Montana, Alberta, and I have since moved far, far away. Several people asked about how they died and what I remember the guy telling me. I didn't get into much detail with him. He told me that the father had an accident while driving and struck an oncoming vehicle with his mother and 2 kids in it. He lived and everyone else died. So it was likely the father who was still around, but he didn't mention anything about what happened to him. Story 5. About 25 years ago, I went hiking in Fossil Falls, just outside of Ridgecrest, CA, with some friends. Once we hike down the falls, we get into the opening of the canyon and start smelling what smells like something dead. As we walk on, the smell gets stronger. We decide to find out what it is. We come upon an area where the smell is just overpowering. On the surface of the ground in this area, there appear to be a couple oil slicks pooled at the top of the surface of the ground, which appears to have been recently dug. We attempt to dig down about 6 inches, but the smell is just beyond anything we can deal with. We decide to leave and call the cops. The cop gets down into the canyon part of the falls, picks up on the smell, and tells us this isn't a good sign. As we get closer, but not even to the place where the smell is coming from, he starts calling in lots of reinforcements, more cops, helicopters, etc. He told us that for something to generate that kind of smell, someone would have had to bury a deer or something of similar mass to make that kind of smell. When we called the cops to follow up on what happened, they told us that it was just some chicken skin and bones. No human remains were found. The official story completely conflicted with what the cop, who had previously been a homicide investigator in LA, had told us. When I told a coworker what had happened, he reached out to a higher-up that he knew at the Department of Forestry Service, or something like that, and when he relayed the story, was told, "How did you find out about this? You shouldn't know about this, and these guys should forget about this immediately." My theory is that someone was killed and buried on government land. Fossil Falls is U.S. government land, and they didn't want it to get out. There is no way in or out of that canyon, unless by military access, road from the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. Story 6. My friends and I make a habit of exploring closed logging roads when we are out in the woods. A couple of years ago, we found a road that had been trenched out but had a couple of cars parked at the end of it. This isn't particularly unusual, and we figured that if people were parked there, at the very least, we would find some huckleberry. As we were hiking along, we passed a family of people that appeared to be doing what we were and just looking around and harvesting some food. As we got near the end of a road, we found some huge piles of freshly dug earth. Attempts had been made to smooth it against the hill face to make it less obvious, but it was still very apparent. Needless to say, we began exploring the area. Just up the hill, we found a couple of trees that had caves dug under them, so that the roots formed a sort of semi-domed ceiling. These were completely empty. As we continued exploring, we started to hear voices. Couldn't see anyone, but they were out there. This is when we decided to return to the road because we probably weren't welcome in that area. Just around the next corner, we reached the end of the road. This is where it started to get really creepy. On the ground, nestled in some rocks, was a still hot cup of coffee. No stove, no people, no tents, nothing, just a cup of coffee. Nailed to a tree next to the coffee was a hand-painted plywood sign. It was a simple warning that cave-ins had been occurring and to evacuate children from the shelters if you saw any dirt falling from the ceiling. At this point, we knew we really weren't welcome, so we got out of Dodge as fast as we could. But we never passed the family. They were gone. All of the cars were still parked at the end of the road, but the people we had passed had vanished. I still have no idea where they went. Story 7. When I was backpacking through the Sierras, I led my group a little bit off of the planned trail, and we found an abandoned cabin. It had windows, though I don't remember a door. It looked like it had been there for at least a few years unkept. There weren't any plants growing inside. On it, which I imagine had to do with other people going by and seeing it, but the wood was very splintered with gaps in the walls. There weren't any nice things inside like a bed, table, or chairs. There were no signs of life at all. It wasn't that near a major water source like a river, although I didn't explore the area fully, and there may have been a creek there before the person moved that I didn't see. The weirdest thing was that it was dozens of miles, not flat miles, including switchbacks up some rocky, snow-covered and steep hills, away from any other people, and that it was maybe 10 feet wide, 10 feet long, and tall enough for a 6-foot-tall man to stand and walk around in. There weren't any signs of the owner growing crops. There were hardly any animals around for the whole trip, though I was not an expert in finding them. The question was, how did this person survive? Was it something someone built and would travel to with a stock of resources, maybe a month's worth of food, and just be out alone? Why there? Where did that person go? Story 8. My buddies and I used to go camping all the time. One weekend, we decided to go check out a spot one of them visited when they were a kid. You hike out for an hour along a crappy old road to a massive clearing. A local landfill had cleared it for future expansion. Just off of this clearing was a path. Follow the path through the woods to another clearing. This one doesn't look clear-cut, just talk grass. Around this clearing are lots of what appear to be very old foundations made of stone. This was the site of a community once, long since abandoned. We explore the remains a bit, and my buddy says, "Okay, check this out." We walk out of the clearing opposite where we came in. There is a wall around this town. It's pretty decrepit now, but definitely a wall. Finally, just outside the wall, a graveyard. Creepy stuff. Some of the tombstones are legible, from as recently as the late 1800s. Some are totally ruined and can't be read. Lots have fallen apart, but there don't seem to be signs of purposeful damage. In fact, it didn't show any signs that anyone at all had ever visited. We camped right there, set up a tent just outside the graveyard, roasted up some hot dogs, and drank some beer, packed everything out, and left the site as we'd found it. When I tell people that story, they usually act like we were out of our fucking minds. To us, if you accept that there are no such things as ghosts or goblins in the world, Camping in an abandoned graveyard shouldn't be any different than anywhere else. We had a great time. Story 9. Not so much camping, but there is a walk through some bush close to where I live, small country town, that I do regularly. It is mostly overgrown 4WD track, and it is very rare for me to see anyone else up in there. Just lots of roos. One day while walking with my dog at dusk, I found a car parked just off the track. It was a standard small sedan, which was unusual for the track, but I really thought nothing of it until my dog got to within 5 meters and went apeshit. The hackles were straight up, and she was continuously low growling and stalked around it at a distance. Normally I would have just walked past, but as it was a hot evening, I thought there might have been a dog left in the car by its owner, which was what was stirring up mine. So I walked up and looked inside. The windows were tinted, but I could make out a pretty messy interior, but no signs of any dog or person inside. My own hound just stayed her distance, still majorly freaked out and obviously anxious about me going so close. I was tempted to try the doors, but was a bit wary of some dude coming back and finding a stranger going through his car. We do get some sketchy characters in the area, so I left it. I thought I would come back tomorrow and if it was still there would report it. Turned out I didn't walk that track for another fortnight, and it was only when I reached that section that I remembered the vehicle which had been parked there. It had gone, but in its place were the torn remains of police tape. It stopped me cold. There had been nothing in our local news about any incident. If the car had been stolen and dumped, it is still unlikely to have required police taping, nor would it have explained my dog's reactions. I have walked the same track heaps of times since, but can't go past that particular spot without thinking what had I missed and being a little creeped out. Still regret not going back to check the following day, though. Story 10. I used to be a parks officer in the Portland area. We were doing a nightly sweep and making sure no one was camping in the areas where camping was not permitted. It was around midnight when another officer and I found a woman in a tent. We told her that she wasn't allowed to camp in the area, and she got pissed. During her rant, she informed us of a bearded man living in a cave hunting small animals with a homemade bow. Now, I was familiar with the area and knew that there weren't any caves present. So I and another officer went to check out the area she described. It was pitch black, and all we had were shitty little flashlights. But down a ravine that dropped maybe 15 feet, we found a small entrance in the side of the dirt that could very easily be missed, as there was a lot of garbage at the bottom of the drop-off. So ignoring every intuition telling me to nope the fuck out of there, I check out the entrance on the side of the ravine. Thankfully, it wasn't inhabited when we got there, but we found a cookie tin filled with raw animal meat, like a lot of scraps of raw meat. So of course, we continued to look around and found tufts of feathers and animal hair scattered through. We then found personal belongings and more general creepy things like an ape Halloween mask. However, did not find the bow that the lady told us about. We pieced together that he dug out the side of the wall, set up his life collection of creepy decisions that led to him being in such a weird place, and began hunting for small critters. So when we were leaving the cave, we discovered a paper bag filled with the remains of what I could only assume was a large bird and a few rodents. The corpses were long decomposed, but the location of them indicated that it was the caveman's bundle of past meals. About this time, we bailed out of the area and cleared the area as fast as possible. We were unarmed. It was only until later that we realized that this guy could have been watching us the whole time, bow in hand and ready to make a move. Story 11, I'm from Australia. When I was in year 11, my outdoor education class went on a camping trip to some campground about an hour's drive away from civilization. Seeing as it was a school trip, rules were imposed such as no leaving tents after 11 p.m. and others. A group of my friends and I decided we would sneak out and go exploring around the campsite to see if we could find anything interesting. And we did. We found some old abandoned train cars. Inside the train cars, there was glass scattered on the ground from smashed windows and lots of mirrors. With only our torches as a light source, it was pretty creepy. We were looking around for about 10 minutes when we heard movement coming from the other train car and were immediately freaked out. I shine my torch through the glass in the doors separating our two cars, and we can make out a silhouette of a person looking back at us. We ran back to the campsite as fast as we could. Also, on the same camping trip, we decided to sneak out again on a different night and go exploring in the completely opposite direction of the abandoned train cars. We were walking up a path when we saw what looked like to be the shape of a man further up the path, just standing to the side, either facing us or turning away from us. We came to the conclusion it was probably either someone from our class, our teacher, or someone from the campsite. We continued walking on the path and got pretty close to this man now. At this point, we could see that he was facing us, and we could make out his facial features. He wasn't anyone we knew, so we turned around and started walking back. We could hear him laughing and heard footsteps trailing us, so we started running. We couldn't hear steps after a while, so we started walking again. I reached into my pocket to check the time on my phone and couldn't feel anything. Realizing I'd dropped my phone, I told my friends and we reluctantly turned back. Further up the path, we could see a little light on the ground and pretty much knew it was my phone, so we went and picked it up. After unlocking it to see if there were any cracks or anything on it from the drop, I was freaked out to find that it was on a draft message with just "hello" on the screen. I hate camping.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.